Now, tell me about what you were saying before when authorities here sort of realized, hey, we've got an issue on our hands. When was that? You were when you're saying it was about 5 years. I think you were saying about 5 years.
Oh, right. Back about in 1998, across Tennessee, we were seeing a continuation of the problem, and depending on which community it was, when those of us who were investigating what appeared to be gangs would bring it up to their leadership, you'd get a variety of responses. Everything from, "Oh, that's nice, go back and do your job, and don't worry about whether they're a gang or not. If they're committing crime, they're committing crime," to, "Well, let's look a little bit more into that and see if we can find a solution to it. If we can find a solution, we'll identify the problem and we'll go forward with it." And we got a variety of responses along that continuum. Many of us ended up going to a conference that the Department of Justice put on out in Gatlinburg, and we were talking, this is in 1998, and we were talking about what we were seeing in our various different areas, from Memphis, Chattanooga, Nashville, Clarksville, and Knoxville. And we realized that we were not seeing the same gangs necessarily, but we were seeing an increase in the presence over even the past couple of years. We started the Tennessee Gang Investigators Association as a result of that conversation during that conference, with the thought being that we were all representing the larger cities in Tennessee, realizing that if we were inheriting the gang problem, as it were, from the larger cities in America, like New York and Chicago and LA and Miami and Houston and the other the places that had a gang problem, we were inheriting their gang problem. Even if it wasn't from their members, we could address the gang problem by talking to them to see what they had done and how they had solved or at least addressed the problem. And by the time that it got to the outskirts or the suburbs of the larger cities that we were at, we would be able to pass that information on in the form of training and assistance and collaboration to the suburbs. And there we were 5 years later, 2003, we started seeing even more. They'd already been there somewhat, but they started being more on the radar screen in the suburbs of Nashville, of Knoxville, of Clarksville, Memphis, and Chattanooga, of course, to different degrees. Obviously, when Memphis is so much larger than Knoxville, you're going to have higher numbers, but the growth away from the city it comes with enforcement. When you crack down on activity, whether it's gang activity or some other type of criminal activity, when you crack down on it, the people who are committing it that don't want to stop committing it are either going to fight back or they're going to move to a place that doesn't crack down as much. That would be the suburbs.
It seems very predictable from what you...
It's very predictable. Yeah, there's many criminological and criminal justice theories that will tell you that it's like water. As we see around us today, water congregates in the lowest form of area where it slides down the hill, runs down the road, and it all ends up in the stream, which feeds the lake, which feeds the ocean, etc. Gang activity looks for places of least resistance. Water looks for gravity to take it away from water doesn't flow uphill. Gang activity doesn't like to occur at the same time that gang enforcement is occurring. So they're going to look for places where they can act in the way they want to without the enforcement.
It's interesting what we were saying too. Some of this as well. They're like any other business person. They may live in the suburbs, do their business in the city, and
Absolutely. A lot of people get wrapped around the axle with gang members of thinking, oh, they're just some dumb criminal. And that's absolutely not the case. Yes, there are people who aren't rocket scientists in the gangs. There's also people in corporate America who are not rocket scientists. When you look at a gang member and if you see anything other than a businessman who happens to be committing a crime or a professional who happens to be professional at committing a crime, you miss all of the message. The primary difference between the gang members and law-abiding citizens is the law. They have good organization skills. If they're running a very productive gang, they obviously have good business skills, good leadership. They understand the flow of money if they're doing it well. There's so much. I'm not about breaking the law. I'm not suggesting that, but we let the fact that they're breaking the law make us think that they're idiots. That's not the case. They just choose to break the law and do what they do. So yeah, there's a lot of very capable and intellectual and intelligent people that run and participate in gang activity.
And then speaking of around 2002 as well, this is when MS-13 really started gaining a foothold, and they were pretty organized.
Right, and coincidentally, along the same times that they, and I doubt that it's what predicated it, but note that on September 12th, 2001, every gang cop that I knew overnight became a terrorist cop. Because all of a sudden we had a new focus in our country. And it took us many years, from Los Angeles to New York to Miami. Every gang cop that I was familiar with, that I was acquainted with, that I had phone numbers and email addresses for, or that saw on a regular basis, I would talk to them after, and it wasn't exactly the 12th, but it wasn't far after that. Hey, what are you doing now? I'm doing some anti-terrorism stuff with the FBI Joint Task Force. So what about the gangs? Do you think they took a hiatus? They're calling each other, hey, we had that thing going on with 9/11. Let's go ahead and give them about 5 years off. No. They said, they're not going to be looking at us for a while. Let's do what we can do to capitalize on the opportunity. They don't have enforcement as much. Some places didn't even see a gang problem. I don't think they went away. What are they going to do? Take a break? They have a calling. They have a job. They're not. We're going to lay off a bunch of gang members today because there's some terrorist activity the police are really going to have to focus on to increase homeland security. Not happening. Not happening. And that was here in Nashville and every other city in America.
These guys sort of became a big dog in town then, too, it seemed like.
Absolutely.
That's just because of those organizational skills?
They've got great organizational skills. They've got an established hierarchy. They've got great discipline. And they have this reputation that they'll kill stuff that gets in their way, that doesn't agree with them. That goes a long way in any environment. But if you're not threatened by my money, my connections, my power, etc., if you realize that everybody that's crossed me is dead, I'm thinking, that might have a little bit, of say-so.
And from Brown Pride's perspective, obviously they're on the brunt end of that. They took a lot of abuse, lack of a better term, from MS-13.
Absolutely.
So was that just because they weren't as organized, they weren't as vicious as MS-13? Do you think, or do you know?
I don't know that there's a gang in America that works like MS-13 does. So unless you have a rival, except for perhaps if we imported some of the 18th Street to come in and be the rival here on the Nashville area, we might have found somebody at that level. Or if one of the other local gangs had decided, you know what, this is our town, you're not going to screw it up. But there wasn't any of that going on, so they were able to be the big man on campus.
Sir 13 and BPs, they couldn't
no
do that.
competition.
Not even close.
Nope.
So then, obviously, we're talking with law enforcement, and they decided they're going to crack down on these guys. And now with MS-13 out of the picture, what does that sort of leave left for the Sir 13 and Brown Pride with the rivals out of the way?
Yeah, my thought is that it allows them for a lot of growth. Granted, you'll have, and I know a lot of the police officers, obviously, that you've talked to, and they'll do their best that they can with, to enforce the law against those who are still here and remain. But that gives a hell of an incentive for those who are still gangbanging in Nashville with the absence, if there is one, of the MS-13, or at least with their major operation taken out of the way. So, they may take over some of the connections, some of the business contacts or whatever, but there's a void. And anytime you have that much activity going on, there's a void that's going to be filled. The criminal element doesn't wait for people to catch up or catch on. They fill the void quickly.
I think that's interesting too. It's not a matter of if they fill the void.
No, it's when.
Yeah,
absolutely. Before gangs were the in thing in the 80s, we were working on lots of drug trafficking cases. We arrested a guy who was doing $2 million a month in 97% pure cocaine. We let the streets die down for 2 weeks, and they were already filling back up. Not with the best quality, but yeah, it doesn't take long for somebody to step in. They might not have the reputation, they might not have the quality, they might not have the same abilities or whatever, but they will definitely replace the options. Close down a grocery store in any city in America. What do people do? They drive a little further to their second choice of grocery stores and complain about the first one closing down. What happens then? Well, the grocery store they just went to calls headquarters. Hey, we got a void. We either need to increase or advertise more or put another grocery store in their place. It's supply and demand. It's very simple economics.